Do you love books? Do you wish you could hear some insights straight from the author themselves? Join Sam Hankin, your host, as he interviews top-selling book authors and dives into interesting and unforgettable discussions here at the Avid Reader.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Jules Howard, author of Infinite Life, The Revolutionary Story of Eggs, Evolution, and Life on Earth. It was published by Pegasus. It was released last month. Jules is a wildlife expert, writes regularly for The Guardian, the BBC, amongst others. He's also the author of Wonder Dog, as well as many other books dealing with our world and its life and wonders, including many for children, which are great. And I'm particularly interested in his wildlife pond book, since I have two koi ponds that swarm with other life as well. Actually, Jules starts his book off with his early experience with frog eggs. And I too have had such an experience. And I remember feeling a mixture of awe and wonder, as well as a little bit of disgust and repulsion. Now I simply deal with their morphed cacophony every night. So there's many eggs that lie, so to speak, in the past, and many more that follow the eggs of frogs on a circuitous page, if you will, that spans all of geologic time from 4.5 billion years ago to the present, when eggs grow on our discarded plastic bottles in that kind of Sargasso Sea that we've built with our refuse. So from the Hadean to the Anthropocene, we journey from the earliest inclination of eggs to the 7 that I just brought up from our chicken coop. And here to take us on that wondrous journey is Jules Howard. So welcome, Jules. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks ever so much for having me. What a pleasure. Yeah, what a treat.
So 4,540,000,000 years ago, why start with the cataclysmic and roiling beginnings of our planet? There weren't any eggs.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. One of the things that I really liked sort of stepping into, I suppose, was this idea of the fact that we think of like animals being shaped by world events, you know, dinosaurs dying from big rocks from space, etc. But actually, a lot of the environments that were around back then were sort of shaping, I guess, what was going on as regards reproduction, cellular reproduction, and the evolution of the egg. So it's really starting 4.5 billion years ago, when we've got a planet essentially in loads of turmoil, you know, this great bombardment of asteroids, you know, most of Earth is basically a volcanic mess. Actually going from that scene of chaos to order of animal life, order of animal eggs seemed like a kind of exciting way to sort of begin the story, I suppose. And really, you know, what we see in that early process of water forming on the planet and, you know, cellular life evolving is we see certain events. You know, in the book, I talk a lot about this big planet-like structure that hit our planet. And, you know, the dust from that explosion formed the moon. And that big explosion, this two planets essentially hitting one another, tilts our planet, the spin of our planet slightly off kilter, and we end up with seasons. And in the book, I argued that, you know, 2,000 million years ago, 2 billion years ago, the very first seasons, if you like, this sort of boom and bust to ecosystems was what led to the formation of these structures that are really tough, that can survive really, really dark, wintry periods. And then when the spring comes, those very simple cellular organisms can regenerate. And essentially the egg is a sort of byproduct, I suppose, of that process. So I must admit, it was quite alien for me writing about very ancient, you know, planets and worlds colliding, and this sort of thing is kind of new to me, and I really enjoyed writing that style of non-fiction. And yeah, I kind of felt like it was a great place to sort of start eggs, really. I think everyone was expecting me to start off with kind of, what came first, chicken or egg, and to really go in there with birds, and everyone's sort of expecting that. And it felt really good to sort of start it really dramatically, I suppose.
Yeah, and when you say dramatically, one of the great things about the book is each of the opening paragraphs is almost poetic. Yeah, I can't think of an example right now, but yeah, the beginning paragraphs really set a scene, and it kind of draws you into the science, if you will, that follows. Which, stepping aside for a minute, as a bookseller, what's important is the cover, the title, because notwithstanding the cliche, that's what everyone comes in and judges our books by.
Right.
So the cover, the title and the subtitle, and also the epigraphs, and we'll go to that in a minute, but the first epigraph by Charles Darwin was amazing because it's like he presaged this whole idea of the primordial soup in one succinct paragraph, well before we had that as our cliche of how life began on Earth, even the electricity that must have given it a jump start. So I was wondering, did you find the epigraphs first and then that was your inspiration? Or did you find them afterwards and it was your explanation?
Yeah, that's really great because no one's ever asked me that before. I think that's a great question. I think I went to the epigraphs afterwards, apart from the first one. Now you're going to ask me to quote it, but essentially the first, I can't actually remember it off the top of my mind because I've got like a really kind of aged brain now. But essentially talking about how planets, stars, biology, if you like, is the product of chemistry, and it's the product of
I have it right here. So
go for it. Okay, Sam.
So this is good. I mean, he goes, but if, and oh, what a big if, we could conceive in some warm little pond with all sorts of ammonia and phosphoric salts, and you talk about phosphorus a lot, light, heat, electricity present, that a protein compound was chemically formed, ready to undergo still more complex changes. In 1871. I mean,
yeah. So that's the Darwin one. I was quoting a different one, I think, just now. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. The Darwin one is, I mean, that is amazing, and like that was a total. We would call that a punt in the UK. I don't know what you call that in America, but an educated guess, I suppose. And as you say, it turned out to be, we think, be pretty much spot on. But yeah, I was really. My other books and the way I've written and the way I do my Guardian pieces, it tends to come from a position of like, the last thing I want to do as a writer is say, hello, I've got all the answers, sit down, shut up. Here we go. I'm going to tell you how this thing works. And like, some people are fantastic at that and they've worked really hard at that and that suits their style, but it's never been mine at all. So this was the first time I'd ever, instead of kind of learning with the audience, I decided to try and tell or set each chapter up with a story, placing the reader there, setting a scene, and then moving outwards from that and telling a kind of chronological story of the evolution of the egg kind of through time. So it was a new experience for me. I'm really, really, really proud of it. Not that I wasn't proud of the other books, but I really feel like this is the sort of book I would have loved to have read, 20 years ago. It would have got me really excited about, the topic.
Well, that's what I was saying about the opening paragraph and you saying set the scene. And that's what, before you get into the actual science, that setting of the scene is what the reader wants to go further, because the setting of the scene is like almost cinematic. But then, and then also the table of contents, you go, wow, the Cambrian, the Permian, the Jurassic, the Cenozoic, and then, here we are in the Anthropocene. And doing it that way, perfectly logical, it makes the reader curious as to what happened next, almost like a movie. And so you chose to do that. So I'm going to start with going back to the book and trying to talk seriatim as much as we can in the time we have. Cyanobacteria, figures like, okay, where would we be in this interview and where would we be in the world at all without it?
Yeah, I mean, this is it. Something like 50% of every human breath that we take is powered by oxygen that's gone through the machine of cyanobacteria. So this is a incredibly important organism, obviously found in the oceans, in the shallow areas, the surface waters, if you like. And these are basically like microscopic solar panels, taking energy from the sun, using that energy to grow new cells, to multiply, to reproduce. And their secret. One of the secrets of their survival is to they repopulate, they populate the ocean, become these kind of red tides that we sometimes hear of. And then when there's no nutrition left, when the ocean's kind of been starved of energy, and there's only the sun left, these cyanobacteria, or not all, but some of them will become these very hard cysts. So these are basically like armor shelled sleep suits, let's say, and these drift to the bottom, and they can some of them survive a year, some of them survive months, some of them can survive 80 years or so in this sleeping condition. And then when the nutrients come back, then they can blossom and bloom, and the whole population is started from these founder sleeping cyanobacteria. And yeah, in the book, I argue that these are, these are precursors, if you like, to what an egg's doing. You know, an egg is at its most basic, it's a kind of time travel device. You know, it allows genes to move forwards through time and sort of bypass the bits when there's not much energy or there's not much going on. But I think the most amazing thing about that for me is the paleontologists that are studying fossil cyanobacteria. You know, we imagine paleontologists out there, don't we, with their trowels, and they're discovering T-Rex, etc. But actually, you know, there are legions of scientists who study nothing bigger than, you know, fossil dust, really, you know, like fossil dust collected and carefully stripped off of fossils of sediment from 500, 600, 1,000 million years ago. And these scientists very patiently are sort of moving these bits of dust around and looking at them through the microscope and assessing, if you like, you know, the condition and the types and the species of cyanobacteria that were around. And I've just got so much love for these fossil scientists now. It's not the kind of paleontology I'd ever come across before, really.
Yeah, and these are the guys that are called, if I'm pronouncing it right, palynologists.
Yeah, that's right, paleontologists. Yeah. So pale as in Greek.
Who they are.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
But you know, it's really funny. This never crossed my mind before. You talk about life, but then you say eggs, while not life themselves, encase the life that would not exist without them. You know, they're a harbinger and a vessel, but they kind of get short shrift because they aren't life.
Yeah, yet. I agree. I totally agree. And like when I was a student, I really relished Richard Dawkins at the time. I just thought his books were absolutely fantastic, and I was always very excited about this idea of, you know, fish moving onto the land, and you know, the elongation of their fin bones, and you know, the earliest limbs, and you know, the fact that we have these, you know, all bony animals on land have the same general arrangement of fin bones. You know, we're walking around with them, but they're essentially stretched out, you know, fish bones, adapted, evolved fish bones. And I was always really captured by that. But the bad side of that is, and I think we're all guilty of this, is you think, well, that's the bit that evolves. We don't think of the other parts of the life cycle evolving. You know, animals had to adapt to the land to deal with gravity, etc. But actually, you know, eggs had to evolve as well, you know, to survive in these places. And in fact, one of my favorite time periods now, like, you know, when I think back to all that research and stuff, I think one of my favorite time periods is the Carboniferous, when you've got a really humid, hot, moist ecosystems, particularly around the edges of continents. It's basically swamp forests everywhere. It would have been an incredible place to travel to. But then you have this real drying out of the planet towards the end of the Carboniferous period. And what I love is that, you know, that drying out of the planet, this heating up of the planet as all the continents merge together for a moment, that heating up of the planet, we see different land animals evolving the same tricks to see their eggs survive. And you know, the fact that insects evolve this incredibly tough, enduring land egg at roughly the same time that our ancestors evolved the same sort of structure with their amniotic egg, this really tough kind of shelled egg. The fact that, you know, the Earth, if you like, the continents, you know, their movement is what sees the evolution of a new kind of egg. So I think you're right. I think that is kind of missing from the story of evolution. The fact that inanimate, stationary objects, you know, can also adapt and evolve.
That's why I was thinking, you know, I never thought of this until you said it. And then the other thing about it is, when you talk about the asteroid hitting and the dinosaurs on, a giant T-Rex on its side. And this little guy comes in, he goes, let's see. Oh, it's great because you describe him walking around the entire dinosaur, checking every possible spot and then going, hey, I know where this gelatinous but drying egg, I'll just put him in there. And then the other thing about it is like how all these guys, clutches of 7, and then the millipede touches every egg, just making sure, did I get this one or did I miss this one? All that stuff is so cool. And it's kind of funny the way you phrase it, because especially the guy all over the dinosaur, that was really funny.
I mean, it's so one of the things that I there's a few things about this book, more than other books perhaps, that I keep thinking of and just thinking that is really cool. And like one of them is that when we see fossil eggs in museums, dinosaur eggs especially, and some of the museums you have in the US, unbelievable specimens of dinosaur eggs, incredible. When you look at a dinosaur fossil egg, you're like, that wasn't just like laid and forgotten about. There would have been an animal, probably, the female, it might have been male and female. Look at the egg. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was not just an egg. It was like looked at, it was cared for, it was deposited, it was made in an egg tube. Like all of these is, like I say, really, there's a real 3-dimensional sort of cosmic quality to eggs. And it's really changed when I look in museums now and I see fossil eggs. It really changes my view of that. And especially this idea that, dinosaur eggs, not all groups, but some dinosaur groups, had these colorful eggs, these dotted, patterned eggs. And again, like there's something really exciting about that, I suppose.
I know, because, and jumping ahead to kind of the end, I think it's before maybe it's before the epilogue. But when you talk about my chicken eggs and you talk about how they're made, it's like this factory, this paint booth where they buff everything off, then they do a primer coat, then they do another coat, then they polish it. And I'm thinking, this is impossible. And then I'm starting thinking, well, maybe I should believe in intelligent design. And then I'm going, we don't have enough time for them to have done this. And then you describe the structure of the outer shell. I mean, the shell where there's all these striations and there's these structural members. And I'm thinking, this is pretty much impossible, right?
Yeah. And I know what you mean about like sometimes with intelligent design, it's definitely the thought is there. You're kind of like, this is really beautiful. This is artistic. And like you say, that I think if you forget about these incredibly long time periods we're often talking about, of course, but it's absolutely extraordinary to me that you can have something so colorful as like an emu's egg that looks like it's been beautifully painted. As you say, there's a gloss, there's a sheen, it's got this lovely turquoise color, and all of the other patterns that we see, particularly with seabirds, that in their eggs, and some of them look like marble, some of them have got freckles, some of them are dappled, some of them have got like pencil markings almost on them. And I mean, it is just beautiful and extraordinary. I also get that feeling with, do you know what shield bugs are? We call them shield bugs in the UK. I'm sure you've got a more well-known name, but these are essentially not beetles. They're a different group. They're true bugs, they're called. And they often see them on trees, and they have a long proboscis, and they suck juices off and out of the plants. They're about the size of your thumbnail. And they lay their eggs on the undersides of leaves, and you see them in the summer. And if you turn over a leaf, sometimes you see them, they're perfectly slotted like billiard balls. They're really slotted together. And their eggs are, I think, as beautiful as birds' eggs. They're really easy to miss. But nowadays with the camera phone, like, the macro setting on your phone, honestly, the beauty that you can see using a macro on these everyday eggs. And they look like, they remind me of, in sci-fi films where you have a mothership and then you have the little pods that go off down to the planets. To me, they look like they've been engineered, and they are really tough shelled. They glisten, they're metallic, and they even have for the little grub. Well, it's not actually a grub, but when the baby, if you like, climbs out, It doesn't just crack open messily like a chicken's egg. These insect eggs like have a sort of hatch. So they have a door, essentially, a real like loose, fragile ring at the top of the egg, and they just pop open. You expect like smoke to come out, but these little life forms climb out, and it just looks so engineered. And
yeah, it's like when
that's what.
When Dave says, "Open the pod bay door, Hal," in 2001.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it is extraordinary, and as as I say, really, these are everywhere. If you actually start thinking and looking about it, I mean, so some people probably think I'm a bit weird for becoming a bit obsessed with eggs, but they are everywhere. In the UK, we have a lot of I don't know if it's as much of a problem for you. Perhaps you can tell me, but we get it at the end of September, October. And it's getting cold now here in the UK, and we get a lot of indoor spiders. They come in from outside and they start laying their eggs. And a lot of our rooms, I have to sometimes, I don't want to, but the kids make me get the Hoover out and hoover them up in the corners of the rooms. But again, that's a really accessible egg, and I must say I've got much more interest in that sort of thing now. But I mean, is that just out of interest? Is that very much an American problem? Do you guys have cleaner houses over there?
No, we have the same thing. I can look up here because the ceilings are high and see exactly what you're talking about. About to get a little chilly. But the other thing about it is when you said the trap door, whereas the chicks have, as everyone knows, the egg tooth. So it's just as much a conundrum and a puzzle that's been solved as to, okay, I'm in this thing. I don't really know what I'm inside of yet because I haven't been born. I don't know what the universe is like, but I have to get out. And I'm going to follow this entire procedure in order to get out. And that's choreographed as well. So it's like, I guess that's the bottom line of my question. You start 4.5 billion years ago. The first jump is a big increment, like 2 billion years. And then each of the next ones is like 100, couple 100 million years. How has there been, you look at your watch, how has there been so much done in so, comparatively speaking, so little time? That's the question that always bothers me.
Yeah, what do you mean?
As well as which came first, as well as that.
Yeah, of course. But like when you say, the amounts of time we're talking about and the complexity that's kind of, do you mean that it's like, how is it that it feels like evolution is like getting more and more sort of accelerating, or do you mean just how right now can we achieve how has this planet achieved so much in 4.5 billion years?
Well, I understand that the moon is moving away from us by 1.5 inches a year. In 100 million years, that'll be 20,000 miles. But okay, so in 1 billion years, that'll be 200,000 miles, and 4 billion. Yeah, that way I can see it. But that's large scale stuff. That just makes sense. But especially the page or two when you describe the making of the egg and the amniotic aspect of it, just for a chicken, it just seems to me like, like Dawkins' book about the blind watchmaker. It's like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there is in the middle of the book, I talk about the Permian, which is a kind of after Carboniferous. Things get very hot, as I mentioned earlier on. And fossils of eggs from that period are really, really hard to find. But one of the fossil eggs that was found in, I think it's Wyoming, this was about 80 years ago. And some other more recent fossils that were found in Brazil that show the eggshell is not preserved as a fossil, but you see the embryo of these organisms called mesosaurs, which are a bit like kind of amphibious crocodile-y kind of creatures. And they are positioned, the fossil embryo is positioned in exactly the same way that we see in birds, and we see in dinosaurs as well, of course. And it's like the head, the long jaws are sort of put underneath the left armpit, I think it is, and the tail swept around from underneath. And this embryo is in that wonderful position. And to see, it's the other side of the aspect that actually one could argue that birds, when it comes to their eggs, aren't super evolved, that yes, the egg is incredibly complex, but almost like that complexity was bred into the egg so much longer beforehand, so we're talking, instead of 66 or 100 million years for birds, we're talking about an egg that's still got those same basic structures. It's still got those little sacs within them, the amniotic egg, as you said, but that actually is there 250 million years ago. And the tricky and the troubling and the annoying thing is that I'm not convinced we'll ever get a good fossil that gives us lots of detail about the midway stages between what was probably quite a simple egg, a bit like an amphibian egg with a shell, and how we move from that to this amniotic egg, which has lots of compartments within it. And it's annoying, but I don't know if we'll ever get.
Your frustration comes through in the book. It's exactly like you're talking about it now. I wish they could do this, and the other thing is that one epigraph, I don't know if it's in that chapter, where I forgot who said it, maybe Haldane, I don't know, but each cell is of the cell, which reminds me of my mother inscribed on this pocket watch she gave me when I graduated law school. It said, "In omnibus partibus relucet totem," which is in each particle, the whole reproduces itself. And then I thought of ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny, even though it's debunked.
Yeah.
But you get those thoughts, and I'm sure you do that too. You get those thoughts in your mind that are almost cosmic.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's where the chicken and the egg thing, that's why it has, so to speak, that's why I think it has legs, is because it is a cosmic question. And, as a zoologist, when I used to get asked that question, I would kind of be a bit like, well, obviously the answer is, well, chickens only evolved 10,000 years ago, and eggs, we've got good fossils of dinosaur eggs, from 150 million years ago, 150 million years versus chicken egg, 10,000 years. There's no question. But actually, that is the most boring answer you could possibly give. The joy is in all of these sub-avenues that you can go down with that question. For instance, I often think with the chicken one, there must have been a moment when that domesticated line was given a name. And at that point, you could argue quite easily, just from the etymology, that the chicken would have come first. In that process, there would have been a mother and a father for that animal that was named by a human. There would have been a mother and a father that had the exact genetic combinations that, when united together in that egg, that became the first named chicken. It's just lovely. It's lovely. And I've come to really kind of enjoy that question, really.
It's almost like Schrodinger's cat, The thing itself doesn't happen until the observer collapses the wave function, because we weren't there to see it. So it's not until we observe it. And then the conundrum is, wait, we're observing this now, we don't know. Usually we get the satisfaction of the wave function collapses. We see the book, we see the star. I mean, I don't know if these books have words in them until I open one of them.
True. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And even the very first, I mean, this was a real taxing, it was a problem really for me writing those early chapters. But yeah, I don't think we'll ever really be able to know for sure why it is those first cells that were bibbling around, why it is those cells that were living in the sea, the Darwin cells that you talked about earlier on, those cells that were gaining cellular complexity, and we can call them early animals, so single-celled, very early animals. What was the process by which some of those very early single-celled animals were reproducing via a structure which is evolved into sperm, and a structure that evolved into eggs? And like there's 3 or 4 fantastic theories. Who knows, in 10 years there might be another 10, but which one of those theories was it? It's going to be really exciting to find that out. I mean, the way my gut feeling is that males, if you like, evolve into a parasitic form that are moving around in those early oceans and basically puncturing female cells and putting their sperm in, and they're multiplying and doing very well for themselves because they are essentially evolutionary cheats. But then we see the evolution of larger female eggs that are producing larger offspring, and they're safer in that environment, and so they're also flourishing. So we might never know the answer to that. But don't you think in some ways, like, I almost don't want to know. I love the fact that there are some areas of science that are forever going to be potentially kind of mysterious. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if you wake up in the morning like I do and go, what the hell am I in? I mean, I think if you continue your life that way with this sense of awe and wonder, I
Yeah.
mean, I just interviewed a guy who says, I don't know what it is, but it's going to be very bizarre.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, it's got to be because we can't imagine what it is. And
Yeah.
we may be inside a pocket universe where we'll never know what it is. But it's funny that you mentioned cheating because you talk about it and then you feel like, well, I don't really want to say cheat. You know, it's not really cheating, but it's a cheat. And I thought that was interesting. So explain that.
Yeah, that's a really good point actually, and I think traditionally the word cheats was often used. So let's think about the example of cuckoo and the host species. The female birds created the nest with the male, and everything's great. 5 or 10 eggs in there, and then cuckoo comes along, delivers an egg, and depending on the species, that cuckoo hatchling, flourishes, essentially gets as much energy as it wants from these completely unrelated individuals, and does very well for itself. So traditionally in zoology, that was like, that's a cheat strategy. But actually, I don't love that word. I think that's a word that might change, because to me, cheating implies fairness and unfairness. And I think it's one of those human words that doesn't really translate brilliantly to animals, because cuckoos aren't going around going, oh yes, cheating the system, unfairness has made me prosper. It doesn't work like that. There's no fairness. There is only, the differential survival of genes, essentially. So as long as we live in a world like that, where these are gene production lines, then maybe the word cheat doesn't kind of work as much. But having said that, this is always the trick with writing about animals and writing about zoology, is you're kind of weighing up what the audience words, I suppose, that the audience already tuned into and already kind of honed and ready for. But it's a tricky one. Yeah, I've had that in the past I've done previous books about animal reproduction, and some zoologists actually will still use the word rape, when it comes to males. For instance, with ducks or mallards, you often see, males kind of forcing themselves really upon females. And that was really commonly used. I was taught that at university. And again, a little bit like cheat. It's like, oh, I don't think that's not a word that belongs in the animal realm. That word needs to retain all of its power somehow.
Yeah,
So
it's not like
yeah,
rape of
yeah.
the Sabine women.
Mm.
But that leads me to another thing you said. And I think it was tongue in cheek, because then you go on and say, okay, well, anyway, it was like, basically, what's the point of sex anyway?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make sense, does it? I mean, it does not make sense that you would have, in a world where it's all about the survival of gene lines, for an individual to halve its genetic investment in the future with each time it reproduces. That makes no sense at all. And also, sex is very costly, as we know. You look at the animals out there, they're investing loads of energy in showing off, in singing, in building nests. The whole thing takes a lot of work, takes a lot of energy. But yet, here it is. We live in a world where, animals, nearly all of them, are kind of addicted evolutionarily to sex. This is a strategy, it's a pattern that just seems to pay out. So the big question is, what, why does it pay out? And ages ago, yeah, go on.
You know how Einstein said that God does not play dice with the universe. I think the universe decided, with regard to biological aspects, let's play dice. Let's just see what.
Yeah, let's play as much dice as possible. Let's invent like a million different games, and let's just, like a massive Vegas, casino. Let's see what happens. And I think, nature is a little bit like that, and I suppose that's good. So using the metaphor of cheats, if you are a parasite, if you are a virus, if you are a cuckoo type of animal, and you go into this giant infinite casino where there's a billion games going on and they've all got slightly different rules, to master that game and to evolutionarily succeed and twist the rules in your favor, it's just so much tougher. So I think, in a funny sort, I wish we'd had this chat as I was writing the book, because I would have used that metaphor. But yeah, I think like that's what's going on here. By mixing up the rules, by mixing up genes, it keeps the parasites on their toes, and it means animals, it's tougher for parasites to exploit them, really. Yeah.
Well, you do, there's and I was like, my brain hurt. And then but then you brought it home in such a way that I understood the analogy. And what you talked about was bacteria in the petri dish, and
Yeah.
then
Oh, right.
antibiotics. And I'm thinking, oh, I get it. So talk about that, because it's like, okay, there's one little tiny white speck, and then it goes, oh, I think I figured this out. And then there's another and another and another. Talk about that experiment. And
Yeah, and I will. I will. The reason in fact, okay, I'll do as you say and talk about the experiment, and then I'll say why I really wanted to include that. So, in the UK, I mean, all around the world, but in the UK, a lot of the NHS, our health service, has got a big problem with antibiotic resistant bacteria. And so we are on a mission at the moment in the UK to make sure that we don't take too much antibiotics, right? Lots of people have it in their cabinets and in their, in their bathrooms, and they're just taking them, and it's like, no, 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 we mustn't do that.
yeah,
So
everybody has amoxicillin.
yes, of course. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, the experiment is an experiment done purely to show how the evolution of antibiotic resistant bacteria, how simple and inevitable it is. So you have if you imagine it like 5 containers in a row, linked together, linked with a sort of fabric, if you like, so bacteria can move across. You've got 5 containers. First container is full of agar, bacteria love it. The 5th container at the other end is full of like 1,000 times antibiotic treatment. So it's like, that's so much more than just amoxicillin. It's like a complete death zone for bacteria. So one end, you've got a death zone for bacteria. At the other end, you've got a paradise for bacteria. And each section increases the amount of toxicity. So harder and harder for bacteria. So you start off with the bacteria at one end in the agar, they're having a great time. The next container, they could move into it, but it's got a little bit of antibiotic treatment in there. So anytime the bacteria try and divide and move into this next container, they don't make it. So what we see is in that first container with the agar, it becomes white, it becomes brimming with literally trillions of bacteria, and they're having a great time, and they're really reproducing and they're going wild, but they just can't get over it. And what you see looking at this physical experiment is you see at the edge of the container, you see all of these bacteria, all of these different variations, so genetically unrelated to each other, all of them dividing, unable to move into this next container until one random mutation hits upon an accidental treatment for surviving that slightly more toxic environment. And it looks to me like a starburst. When you see the sun, you see images of our sun, and you see a big, beautiful burst come out of it. It's like a solar flare. You see that bacteria start to reproduce, and suddenly you see a white stream of bacteria moving into this next container. Those ones are the accidental survivors. They've hit upon this treatment to survive in the slightly more toxic place. Literally 2 days later, that second container is full of bacteria. And we see on this next layer, we see the same thing happen. So we see trillions and trillions of rolls of the dice, as we were going back to what we were saying before. And then you see one lucky combination that hits upon a way to survive in the third container, ever more toxic. That spreads. And we see that in the 4th container, by the 3 days after that. And eventually, after something like 12 days, that final container, the one that is just a total, unlikely place for bacteria to live, is full to the brim. It is white with antibiotic resistant bacteria. So the reason that, I love that. Years ago, I used to work in schools talking about zoology and evolution and paleontology. And that was always a way I would go in with to explain some of the things that we see in nature. So we talked about how on earth can a bacteria survive in a place that is a death zone to bacteria. You could argue the same thing for fish moving onto the land. The seashore is the same thing. Top end of the beach where the waves don't reach, that's a death zone for ocean animals. Bottom end is, that's a place that they can get a foothold and they can evolutionarily sort of succeed in that shoreline zone. So we see the same thing that happened with bacteria moving up these containers of death. We see the same thing through fossils, actually, quite nicely. We see the same thing with early crustaceans. We see the same things with the earliest insects. We see it with some land crustaceans. We see it with mollusks. We see it with snails. And of course, we see through footprints and some other amazing fossils of skeletons, we see it through the earliest landfish as well. So I guess the short conclude the punchy bit I'm going to say for you is this. It was inevitable that we would end up with eggs on the land. It was inevitable that we would end up with eggs in deserts. It would be inevitable that we find them, in these most hospitable places, because essentially this planet has got so many boxes of death. There's no other, everything is kind of worked out as you would almost predict when it comes to animal life conquering continents, I suppose, through the medium of eggs.
Yeah, it's funny. The other metaphor I thought of is like kind of different. It's like if you're going to go swimming, but the ocean, or no, you're by a swimming pool, you dip your toe in and it's incredibly cold. And so you're afraid. But then you go, well, I'll dip a little bit more in. And then eventually you are in completely, you're shocked, but eventually you become acclimated to it. So I thought, I wonder if there's a visceral response that isn't necessarily based in science, that some of these creatures thought, okay, how am I going to get on land? There's no way. Look at that thing. It's impossible. But then it does become possible, and then it becomes pervasive.
Yeah. And this is going to sound a bit crazy, but I'm really addicted to a TV show at the moment called For All Mankind, which is over here. It's on Apple Plus, and it's a kind of retelling of the story of the moon landings, viewed from the perspective of Russia getting to the moon first. And this story spans sort of 50 years. But I look at it through the perspective of eggs now, because I kind of see eggs as like astronauts, if you like. These are little spaceships, and the moon landing astronauts and, the incredible engineers that worked on, the Apollo missions, those designs, they're still there in modern day spacecraft. They're still there, but they've been moved and they've been, as you say, they've been adapted and they've been changed, and the things that work, they're still there, but, there's additions and additional aspects added onto it. And I look at engineering like that, and I do see that sort of parallel with, with a lot of biology as well, that really it's this sort of, with humans, of course, we're thinking about the process, but the result is the same. We see the retention of stuff that works and the addition of small tweaks that make it ever better. Yeah, it's fascinating.
The other side of that is there are biological dead ends too. Try it out, but no, it didn't work, and then they're not here anymore.
Yeah, and also, I suppose you're right. Yeah, nature's full of the fossil record is full of the dead ends, you could say, and then you've got some of them that are not necessarily dead ends, but like they're long corridors that have never really done much, and they're still kind of here today. So you've got some wonderful horseshoe crab populations, haven't you, in North America? And they're something that really haven't changed in an obvious way for 400 million years. They're still crawling around in our oceans. They're still laying eggs on beaches today.
That's why I always think about, if there is an apocalypse in our time today, things are getting a little closer, that cockroaches will be really happy. They're going to rule the world. They'll be, there's always someone new who rules the world, whether it's dinosaurs or then mammals. And I also think of like crocodiles, which, and they have alligators and crocodiles. They got a good 300 million years where they go, basically they're going, this seems fine.
Yeah, I agree. And I sometimes the annoying thing about the way that animal life evolves and plays out is like, I don't think we'll ever get to know, but like, wouldn't it be fantastic? Yeah, as you say, if the world, we went through a pinch point, like the dinosaurs did, and the crocodiles sleeping in their burrows, those Nile crocodiles that can sleep for, is it 7 years they can sleep for or something like that in their burrows? And, they repopulate the world, and we end up with, crocodile versions of rabbits, and, it would be absolutely extraordinary. Plankton, like a blue whale version that's based on a crocodile, it'd be fascinating.
I was thinking about, I was just talking to my friend this morning right down the street about that. Just think if any of these, whether it's ants, whether it's cockroaches, whether it's mosquitoes, whether it's spiders, just think if they were our size, we would last like an hour. And an ant could throw us more than 100 yards.
Yeah. It's fascinating to imagine, isn't it? Yeah, lovely.
Okay, I've done it again. We're way off track. So going back to selling the book, you talk a lot about resting cysts. You like them, but they're vaguely repulsive to me as well.
I'd agree. That word cyst, it's not,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't conjure up the nicest image. But yeah, resting cysts. So these are the sleep suits. There's like a sleeping bag really for cyanobacteria, and these resting cysts are still part of the ocean floor today. So this is literally littered with billions of these tiny cysts. They remind me of bathyscopes, these old-fashioned submarines that we used to use. Yeah. And then when nutrients return, when the seasons change, some of them will revive themselves, and off they go, and the whole ocean repopulates. So yeah, resting cysts. I argue in the book that resting cysts are a forebear of the egg. But again, that's one of those that it's very hard for us to test. But, a bit like Darwin did, I suppose. I can't believe I'm about to compare myself to Darwin. Absolutely not. That's not my intention. But, resting cysts, could well be, his version of those cells bubbling around in that warm pool that you talked about earlier on.
Yeah, and that goes to one of the other things where you kind of pop this balloon that people have is when you're talking about marsupials and you go, well, there's kangaroos, there's wallabies, but then you go into the whole thing, which I'm going, well, okay, are we talking about eggs or are we not talking about eggs?
Yeah, like you're right. When we think of mammals and we think of ourselves and the way that we reproduce and the umbilical cord and the placenta and obviously with marsupials, same general pattern, although of course theirs is a little bit crazier than our system. And you're right, there isn't a defined egg that we can see. Of course the egg cell's in there, but like we can't see it in the same way. And you're right, I had to sort of widen my definition a little bit to include them, because I don't know, for me, one of the things that I really like about writing about evolution is it allows you to reinterpret some familiar aspects of our lives. One of my personal feelings is in the UK. I don't know what your feelings would be a North American perspective, but I don't think we do sex education very well in the UK, particularly when it comes to things like menstruation and puberty. And I feel from writing and researching and kind of studying animals, you've got a really good way in there to talk about some pretty meaty stuff. And so for me, talking about the placenta and very strange hooked up setting that we mammals have evolved allows you to explain some of the aspects of human life that people haven't really thought about in a biological way. Very easy, I think, to say to kids, this is the way it is. You have got this system, deal with it. Here's how humans deal with it. Get on with life. But actually, I think looking at biology and looking at the way other animals do reproduction allows you to sort of, I don't know, really see the ape side of humanity. And I feel like that can only be a good thing. But I mean, do you have an American perspective on that?
Well, yeah, I agree. We don't teach, well, even with the conservatives, we don't teach it at all. It's horrible. But it's like, again, this chance thing. I'm wondering what animal thought, here's the placenta coming out, maybe I should eat it. I don't know, it sounds disgusting, but I think maybe I'll try it.
I'll try it, yeah. And is there many, like you think about our kids, for instance, they just won't try new foods. Whether there is variation, within a population of wolves, for instance, there's some, there's one or two wolves are like, oh, you did what? You put that in your mouth? That's disgusting. But this is a very, it's this sort of disgusting thing to say, but like unbelievable kind of iron reserves flow through the placenta. So it must have a real tang, no doubt about it. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know, wouldn't it, what percent, or even how we know in a lot of human cultures, of course, that's part of the process, as is burial, but how much was that a part of our process? It'd be really interesting to know, because it's so smelly, of course. If you imagine in the wilds of Africa, that is such a smelly object, you would want to get rid of it or keep it away, hide it away, or eat it, because the smell is going to attract predators. So
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
The other thing you say, remember, how did birds figure out, he's hatched, but I need to get rid of this egg out of the nest, because if it smells like this, these guys are going to be attracted to it. I mean, all these things are impossible. But basically, they're just impossible.
You can't get me to just end there and go, yeah, it's all impossible. I would say it feels impossible, and there are aspects of it we can study. But you're right. When it comes to actually being able to know exactly where that behavior in birds evolved from, it would be, my guess is it would be within dinosaurs. And dinosaurs probably had legions of egg predators. They may well have had toxic eggs for all we know. Many birds have toxic eggs. We won't get to know, but the fact that we see it so widely in perching birds, so this is the biggest of all bird groups, suggests that it goes back a long way in history, removing the eggs. So in the UK, we say, oh, birds do that because of foxes. It's not that. Birds do that because of probably dinosaurs, probably from millions of years ago. That's where this sort of behavior kind of has its roots. But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can think, okay, again, I was talking to someone about, yesterday I interviewed a guy about human consciousness, and he was talking about panpsychism, and he was talking about who's conscious, who's not. Do you draw a bright line? I'm pretty 99% sure my dog is conscious. Well, I know he is because he's barking now. But is the ant conscious? And then panpsychists believe that the electron is conscious. And he goes, I'm 99.99% that the electron is not, whereas I'm 99.99 that my dog is. Where do you draw the line of consciousness? And that's probably something that you've thought about as well. But as we wind down, and I want to do this before we leave each other, is at the end, and some of it's in the epilogue too, you talk about what I mentioned in the introduction, the eggs on our plastic bottles, but you talk about climate change, you talk about temperature and a small variation changing everything. And so I guess I have to ask you, as far as your entire life is concerned and your career and the timeline we have, I ask this of everyone who deals with this kind of thing. Are you optimistic? Are you cautiously optimistic? Are you fatalist about where we're going and whether we have the ability to forestall what is probably an inevitable, like Thanos said, and you said, I am inevitable,
Yeah. It's an absolutely brilliant question. That, can I ask your opinion first? What generally do you feel like the people that you're interviewing are kind of split down the middle? There is fatalists, but also equal amount of optimism. What's your feeling?
The people who write books about all this stuff, they always say they're cautiously optimistic, because otherwise their book is kind of like, But I'm a fatalist at heart, so I just assume in 5 or 10 years we're not going to be here. And I also feel like, it's, everyone says save the planet. The planet's fine. All it needs to do is to eliminate one species, us. And in 10,000 years, all our buildings, everything will be gone except maybe the pyramids, and the planet will be so happy. Right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it would be lush. The place would be lush. Again. So where do I sit? Just now I think you said deep down you're a fatalist. I feel like deep down I am a fatalist, and I feel bad. Well, put it this way: if we don't sort this out, I can't see how anyone could be anything other than a fatalist. When you look at fossils, when you look at the fossil record, what you see are, 5 massive extinction events in the history of animal life and plant life, of course. We see events where, 50%, sometimes 70% of all animal groupings gone. Sometimes within 2 million years, so there's still, some of your listeners will think, well, that's a long time, but in evolutionary terms, in geological terms, that's not long at all, 2 million years. So we see these patterns across the fossil record, and in our lifetimes, there are animals that live near me now that I haven't seen in 10 years. Right, that when I was young, I would see quite a lot. We talked about frogs at the start, for instance. I haven't seen a single frog this year. That's a local extinction. Hopefully that species will be fine. Obviously, it lives in Europe. This species that I'm talking about, it will be fine right now. But these are all, they're death by 1,000 cuts. These are all individual. We're all seeing, aren't we, right now? We're seeing single knives in this death by 1,000 cuts.
Just the bees alone, and what that would mean
Yeah, in this year, we've seen a 70% drop in butterflies in the UK in 1 year. So hopefully next year the weather will have a slightly better year and numbers will recover. But like, you can't deny that these very striking statistics are happening. I think if someone was saying to me, look, it's just butterflies that we've got these statistics, I would say that's worrying. But it's the fact that we keep coming up with these different observations that are suggesting some serious changes in animal populations. So yeah, fatalist, this stuff happens in nature. Hopefully this won't be a deep biological recession. But guess what? The only people with some sort of agency here, sorry, the only animals with some sort of agency here are the species that we represent. As you said at the start, I spend a lot of time writing children's books as well. And normally I mean, you know this better than I do by far. Often with these kind of books for children, you would have a last page where you basically say, oh, these animals you've just been learning about. Oh, unfortunately, they're having a bit of a tough time at the moment. So you might want to think about doing this. And often those suggestions that we say to people are, join a local nature club. Or, you might say, you can take part in, if you like birds, you can take part in your local nature reserve, learning their names. And I don't do that myself anymore because I'm like, no, we need to sort of cut to the chase here. And it's mostly about educating ourselves properly. But to be honest, it's about voting for the right people. And I kind of feel like that's missing from a lot of the argument here. So not only are we a species with agency, I hope that we're not all powerless, that we can, although it feels really hard. And I'm thinking of you guys politically at the moment as well, but we've got our own problems here in the UK. But, I feel like we have to, in some ways, like my belief in nature is tied to my belief that we can change things politically. But I worry about that all the time. And I used to naively think, oh, we're getting more environmental in the UK and that, environmental policies are on the up. Turns out the last 10 years, I feel like we've lost a lot of them. A lot of the people that work in that sort of sphere have gone. And I worry greatly that things are going backwards for us here in the UK. But I mean, what's your perspective?
Well, it's like you were saying about join your local, clean up trash for a 10-mile stretch on the highway. But I asked ChatGPT, so how long would it take you if you recycled to make up for one Taylor Swift private jet flight to one Eras concert and back? And it said 2,000 years. But I don't know. And then she does all the carbon offsetting, but that's just a cheat, a real cheat. But
yeah.
The other thing is,
go on, sorry.
I had this salon that I just started where we get together and we talk about one specific topic. And we were talking about AI, and I was talking about possibilities of what will happen. And I said, what do you guys think? And the one guy goes, well, the sun's going to rise tomorrow and I'm going to play with my kids. And I said, well, not in the Sudan, not in Ukraine, not in Palestine, but we're all, especially Americans, so they're all, yeah, we'll be fine. Yeah, you will until you're not. It's very simple. Everyone will be fine until they're not.
There's a similar thing. I don't know if you've noticed this as well. Of kind of I've noticed a lot of people being kind of like, I don't want to look at the news. I don't want to look at the news because that's not where I want to be. It's changing, my quality of life, and it's a similar argument. Is like we sort of do we need to know that, as you say, like that's some people can't avoid the news. They're living these awful tragedies and products of climate change, etc.
And so, then all the kids that work for me, none of them want to have children. Very few believe, and my daughters feel the same way. Why would I torture them that way? And that's, Elon Musk was he's such a conundrum because he's done so much and he's done so much, but he says depopulation is the biggest threat to mankind right now, which is possible. Okay, well, now we're going, who knows what we're talking about in relationship to the book. So probably we should end it there. We've been talking for well over an hour. We could go for much more, but I really appreciate you being here, and I've had a wonderful time talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And like, I would love to visit your bookshop one of these days. Next time
Yeah.
I'm over, I don't know. I would love that. It'd be so nice because it sounds fantastic. I was looking on is it Atlas Obscura, the website?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, oh wow,
I
that's a
don't
nice
know.
shop.
I don't know what they were thinking, but
It's like top 100 books in the world or something like that. As top
they
100
did
shops
they
in
did the
world.
top 62. I don't know why they did the top 62. It's another dice throw. Why?
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, and
Okay.
it's the bookstore is as strange and weird as I am because I did it. So there's everything
Yeah.
from diving helmets to heads in a jar, and
Yeah. Yeah. Oh well, all power to you. All power to you. What a fantastic place.
well, we'll talk again next time you write, and hopefully you will come by and we can go have a drink, and there's bars
Yeah.
downstairs.
Lovely.
Okay, Jules. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thanks a lot. All right. See you later.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Avid Reader. If you liked today's episode, check out more of our content on our channel.